Today, we bring you a story about kindness, sacrifice, and a secret that stunned everyone on Flight 247. When Barron Trump gave up his first-class seat to an elderly veteran, no one could have imagined the extraordinary turn of events that followed. What happened mid-flight will leave you speechless. It was a brisk morning at Ronald Reagan Washington National Airport. The terminal buzzed with the energy of travelers rushing to and fro, some caught up in the chaos of late arrivals, others peacefully lost in their books or phones. Flight 247 to Newark was fully booked, as was often the case during the holiday rush, and the usual airport chaos was in full swing. There were announcements over the PA system, last-minute gate changes, and a constant shuffle of rolling suitcases on the polished floors. Among the passengers boarding the flight was a tall, quiet teenager, his figure partially obscured by the crowd. He was seated by the window in first class. His name, Barron Trump. Though instantly recognizable to many, Barron was a young man who preferred to stay out of the public eye. Dressed simply in a dark sweater and jeans, he sat with his face absorbed in the pages of a hardcover book. He looked like just another traveler in a sea of passengers, but this was no ordinary flight, and Barron was no ordinary teenager. He had an air of quiet contemplation, always one to avoid the spotlight. Even so, his presence on the flight drew the occasional glance, but for the most part he was unnoticed, blending into the background of the busy terminal and aircraft. Meanwhile, in the economy section, there was a very different passenger preparing for the journey. An elderly man shuffled slowly down the aisle, his movements deliberate yet stiff. His back was slightly hunched, perhaps a sign of the years he had lived, the burdens of time and service weighing upon him. His silver hair, neatly combed, gave him a dignified air, and the military jacket he wore, a deep shade of olive green, was adorned with faded patches and medals. These were more than just symbols of his time in service. They were marks of sacrifice, of decades spent defending his country, a testament to everything he had given. Clutching a worn leather duffel bag, the man found his seat near the back. It wasn't the most comfortable space, cramped, noisy, and filled with the restless energy of children and impatient passengers. Still, he settled in quietly, placing his bag on the overhead compartment before sitting down. His tired eyes spoke volumes of years lived, battles fought, and victories earned and lost. But despite the discomfort of the seat and the cacophony of voices around him, he remained composed. There was no sign of complaint in his demeanor, only a quiet dignity that commanded respect. Just as the cabin door closed and the plane began to taxi toward the runway, the elderly veteran seemed visibly uncomfortable. He spoke softly to the flight attendant, his voice carrying a hint of unease as he explained that he would prefer a different seat. The flight attendant nodded, but her face clearly displayed confusion, and she leaned toward him, asking whether there was a specific issue. His distress was palpable, his back was hurting, and he seemed out of place in the cramped economy section. His distress wasn't just physical, there was an emotional weight behind it, a need for something more than just comfort, perhaps even for a kind of recognition. Some passengers nearby turned their heads, sensing something unusual, but no one offered assistance. In fact, many were distracted by their own worries or the excitement of the flight ahead. Seated in first class, Barron had a clear view of the scene unfolding in the back, his brow furrowed in thought as he watched from his comfortable seat. He wasn't one to react impulsively, but something about the exchange caught his attention and stirred a sense of empathy within him. Without hesitation, he pressed the call button for the flight attendant. When the flight attendant arrived, Barron made an unexpected request. He looked at her, his voice calm and firm, yet carrying an unmistakable sense of purpose. "Can I switch seats with the gentleman in the military jacket?" The attendant paused, stunned by the request. She blinked, clearly processing the situation. Passengers in first class exchanged curious glances, their murmurs growing louder as the realization dawned that someone from the exclusive first class section was willing to give up their seat. The atmosphere shifted. People looked between Barron and the elderly man, unsure of what to make of this quiet yet profound gesture. But Barron was resolute. He stood slowly, reaching for his carry-on bag. As he did, a woman seated nearby leaned toward him, her voice low but filled with a mix of confusion and disbelief. "You don't have to do that, you know. You paid for this seat," she said. Barron smiled softly, a glimmer of understanding in his eyes. Some people deserve it more. His voice was calm, almost serene, but his words carried a weight that silenced any further objections. As Barron made his way down the aisle toward the back of the plane, whispers began to spread throughout the cabin. Phones appeared, some passengers discreetly capturing the moment, while others exchanged knowing glances. A young man, tall and dressed in first class, was now heading towards the economy section to offer his seat to an elderly man. The act, though simple, spoke volumes about the values Barron embodied: respect, kindness, and an understanding of the sacrifices others had made before him. Reaching the elderly man's seat, Barron crouched slightly to meet his gaze, his voice steady and sincere. "Excuse me, sir, would you like to switch seats with me?" The veteran looked up, his eyes widening in surprise. "Are you sure, young man? You don't have to do this for me." Barron gave a small but warm smile, his voice soft yet clear. "I want to. Thank you for your service." The elderly man hesitated for a moment, visibly moved by the gesture. Then, after a long pause, he extended his hand. "Well, thank you. That's mighty kind of you." The veteran took his place in first class, a mixture of gratitude and disbelief etched on his face. His stiff posture seemed to relax as he sank into the plush seat, though his eyes remained distant, as if processing the magnitude of what had just happened. Meanwhile, Barron slid into the tight economy seat, his tall frame folding awkwardly as he adjusted to the smaller space. Yet he seemed unbothered by the discomfort. He sat quietly, ignoring the curious glances around him, lost in his thoughts. But what happened next would change the course of the flight. Mid-flight, as the plane soared smoothly above the clouds, the elderly man summoned a flight attendant. She approached with a polite smile, but her expression shifted to one of concern as the veteran handed her a small, weathered envelope. He whispered something to her, and moments later, the captain, a tall man with a kind face, approached Barron. "Mr. Trump," the captain began, his voice steady and respectful, "the gentleman you gave your seat to has asked to speak with you." Barron returned to first class, unsure of what to expect. The veteran was sitting there, holding the envelope tightly in his trembling hands, his face flushed with emotion. As Barron approached, the man looked up at him, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I wasn't sure I'd ever meet you," the veteran began, his voice thick with emotion. "Years ago, I served with a man who saved my life. He was brave, selfless, and he talked about his family all the time. A little boy he was so proud of. That man was your grandfather, John Trump." Barron froze, his mind racing as the pieces of the story began to fall into place. The veteran continued, sharing stories of courage, sacrifice, and the bond that had been formed during the darkest days of war. The man handed Barron the envelope, which contained a black and white photograph of a young soldier standing beside John Trump. The photograph wasn't just a relic of history. It was a link, a tangible connection to a part of Barron's family he had never known. The veteran explained how John Trump had risked his own life to save his fellow soldiers, leading to a bond that... The photograph was more than just an image. It was a window to the past. The young soldier standing tall next to Barron's grandfather was not just a friend, but a brother in arms. The veteran recounted how John Trump had led a charge to rescue his comrades during a fierce battle, a moment of heroism that would remain etched in the veteran's mind forever. Barron returned to his seat in economy, the photograph still clutched tightly in his hands. He gazed out the window, his expression a mixture of pride and deep reflection. A simple act of kindness had uncovered a piece of his family's history he had never known. One that was now intertwined with the stories of bravery and sacrifice shared by the elderly veteran. In the quiet moments that followed, the atmosphere on the plane shifted. Passengers began to see Barron in a new light. His selfless gesture wasn't just an act of generosity. It was a bridge to the past, a reminder of the sacrifices made by those who came before him. As the plane began its descent towards Newark, the energy on board had changed. Strangers exchanged smiles, nodding to one another in quiet understanding. Conversations became softer, warmer. The whispers of Barron's famous name faded into the background as the passengers reflected on a young man's quiet gesture of respect and the incredible story it revealed. Sometimes it's the smallest actions that lead to the most profound revelations. Barron Trump's decision to give up his seat wasn't just an act of generosity, it was a bridge to a powerful connection between the past and present. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more tales of kindness and unexpected connections. Until next time, take care and stay inspired.